Hi there, this is a little video for people who've been on my Get Off Auto workshop and went away with their main way of shooting being to use the Aperture Priority Mode, which is the one that controls the depth of field. And what we mean by that is are there soft focus areas in the foreground or background of the image, or is the image in focus all the way through from the front to the back. So the first thing we need to do is put our cameras into the A mode, Aperture Priority Mode. On most cameras it is just an A on the dial on top of your camera, the main dial on the top there, but with Canon it's a V. So if I just check that's where we are on this camera, that's right, and now I'm just going to wake my camera up slightly. Now, just as a first point, I am using a mirrorless camera here, and what that means is I can use this screen on the back of my camera to shoot, or I can use the viewfinder. Now, SLRs will have, most of them will have the ability to bring the picture up on the back of the camera using a function called live view, but you only really use live view actually for still life situations like this. You could use it so that you can see what you're doing when you're working on a tripod like this, but the disadvantage of using live view in other situations, for example when you're hand holding the camera and photographing things just generally, is that the camera will be very slow to focus and it will drain your battery quickly. So you're only seeing me using this mode because I'm on a mirrorless camera and I can. Your information is more likely to be something like this, where you can tell that I'm in A mode there, there's my shutter speed and my aperture, and my ISO is there. Okay, and they're all things that we will be talking about. So I'm just going to go back to the normal mode for my mirrorless camera. The camera is now seeing and showing me what it sees through the lens. Okay, so let's talk about the aperture and how we change it and what it does. If you remember, when you want to really blur the background, you use a low F number, and that's a big hole, and that will give you the maximum blur that that particular lens can give you. Now on my camera at the moment I have a very similar lens to the Nifty 50, which is the little 50mm f1.8 lens that I told you all about and that everybody falls in love with so much because of its ability to blur the background. So on this lens on my camera I can get this aperture to go all the way down to f1.8, and it will give me the most blur that I can get in the background with this lens. So if we see now, for instance, the background looks very blurred in that image and a lot of the tulips will be blurred. Okay. So there's a process that I prefer everybody to use that I think makes most sense and helps you to be in a routine, if you like, or a habit that puts you in control and doesn't let you sort of worry about what you should be doing. And that for me is to always set the aperture first. Set this F number first for the look that you'd like to have in the picture. So in this instance I would like to have a very blurred background, so I've selected f1.8. And then the second thing that you need to do is check the shutter speed. Is it fast enough for what you're trying to capture? And if you're doing something inanimate, like we are in this case, when you're hand holding your camera, I'm only using a tripod for the purpose of this video. Normally I would be much more likely to be hand holding my camera when I go around doing things. If you're hand holding your camera, you want your shutter speed to be 1/60 or higher. Okay, if it's higher, like it is in this instance, it's 1/250, that's absolutely fine. But if it's lower, you need to do something to get it to be higher. Okay, now we can't set the shutter speed when we're in aperture priority because we're controlling the aperture, but the camera is setting the shutter speed automatically depending on the light. Now I'm in a very bright room here, it's very sunny outside and it's a good bright room with white walls. and I'm using a very large aperture. So we've got plenty of light in the room and plenty of light going into the camera. Okay, and that's why my shutter speed is so fast, okay, or relatively fast. But we've not talked about ISO yet, have we? The button I like to refer to as the magic button that helps cope with the light conditions, basically. Rather than a big complicated discussion about what ISO is, you use it according to the light conditions. Okay, so in very bright circumstances you perhaps would set this ISO very low, and as the light gets more and more low, if you're indoors or you're walking in a forest or it's a very, very dull day or early evening, you would start to make this ISO number very, very high. So let's just have a look what happens when we do change that ISO number. Okay, so I've got mine at 800 at the moment, which in such a bright room is probably a little bit high. So let's see what happens if we make it lower. Okay, so let's go down to sort of around 100 and look what's happened to my shutter speed now. It's only 1/30. Okay, so that's not sufficient for me to hand hold the camera and take a picture of these tulips, because it needs to be at least 60 for hand holding the camera for an inanimate subject. And can you see I'm getting a warning? That's a handshake warning, warning me that that shutter speed is too slow. So purely by making that ISO higher, let's just have a guess at 400 perhaps. Okay, yeah, we've now shot up to 125 just by changing that number. Okay, so number one, we set the aperture. Number two, we check the shutter speed, and if it isn't what we think it should be for the movement in the picture, then we adjust the ISO. Okay, so I could actually, if I wanted to, drop the ISO down a little bit, and I've still got 80. So let's drop it down again, and I've got 60 now. So I've got the ideal shutter speed for hand holding a camera and getting a steady picture. Now, why did I drop that ISO rather than just leave it higher? Okay, so if I leave that ISO higher, you could risk getting grain or digital noise in your pictures, and what that looks like is speckliness, particularly in the shadowy areas. Now, to be honest, at ISO, 800, 1000, I'm not going to see much of that speckliness. But if I start to put my ISO up really high, typically if I go up high, much higher than 2500, 3200, I will start to see some grain in my picture. So the best thing to do is only use the ISO as high as you need to. I'm not going to be too bothered if I'm using it at 640 and my shutter speed's 200 here. If I was in a rush and I wouldn't be too bothered about saying, well, my ISO is a little bit high and I didn't need the shutter speed to be that fast. I wouldn't be too concerned about that. Okay. So, apologies for my dogs barking in the background. I can't do a lot about that, so hopefully it's not too distracting. What I'm going to do now is show you the effect of taking a picture at f1.8, okay, and having a look close in at this image. Oops, we need to be on playback image and quickly zoom in. Okay, and then if I move around my image a little bit, can you see how soft focus those flowers are? And look at the background, okay? It's really soft focus, and that's because of that f1.8 aperture. Okay, so let's jump up a bit and say we want not just this flower that I'm focusing on there to be in focus, but I want some of the ones in the background to be in focus as well. So, number one step, change your aperture. Okay, so let's take that up to, let's go up to 6.3, 7.1, 6.3, there we go. Now, number one step, set the aperture, which we've done. Number two, check the shutter speed. It's dropped, and the reason it's dropped is because we've made the aperture smaller. We've made the hole in the lens smaller, and not as much light is going in through the camera. And we've got our flashing warning again of camera shake. Okay, so to make that higher again, to get it to reach 60, we change the ISO. We make it faster. And I'm going to guess that 1600, nope, 1600 is not fast enough. Can you see? 1/40. Okay, it's just a guessing game. 2000, still not quite high enough. 2500, there we go. And we've now got our shutter speed of 60. Okay, I am in danger of getting a little bit of grain in this image, but I'm not too worried about it. I know I can remove it when editing, and I know even if I didn't do that, it wouldn't really spoil the image, particularly if I'm not going to make that image very large. Okay, so let's actually take that shot now and compare it to the one that we had before. So there's my shot at, I'm just trying to show the aperture, f6.3. Just remove that information, oops. And there's my shot at f1.8. Look at the difference in that. Look at the background, okay? So there's a vast difference, isn't there? Okay, now if I could have gone sort of slightly lower with my F number and got slightly less of the background in focus. But let me just show you what happens if I go up much higher. Okay, if I go up to sort of F13, my shutter speed has really dropped again, and I'm going to have to make that ISO very high. This is a bit of an unrealistic situation, to be honest, because I don't normally shoot flowers at f13. I want a soft focus background normally, okay, so I wouldn't normally have to use ISO 10,000 to get my shutter speed of 60. So if I just remind you of the order, we set that, we checked the shutter speed, we changed the ISO. But let's just have a look. If we take that image, okay, and then we review it. Okay, everything should be in focus in this image now. So zoom right in. I don't know if you can see it on video, but this is quite grainy. These flowers aren't quite particularly crisp and clear. It's all around here. All this is digital noise from that high ISO. Okay, so I think that's all I need to say to you today, that the principle is set the F number, check the shutter speed and adjust the ISO when you're in aperture priority mode, and then have a good play with that. Perhaps set yourself up a subject like this at home and have a good play with getting familiar with setting the aperture and adjusting the ISO and shutter speed to what they need to be. And that's all for now. Thank you.